Welcome back to Just Giants with Grump and the Cranky Fan, your favorite Giants podcast. I'm your host, the Football Grump. With me, as always, is Mike, the Cranky Fan, and we are back with some excellent news in Giants land. The Giants have hired head coach John Harbaugh, who was just recently released by the Baltimore Ravens, former Super Bowl winning coach. Pretty much the top of the list for Giants fans, for the New York Giants. They went out and they got him. So this is excellent news. How you feeling, Cranky Fan?
How you doing, Grump? I feel fantastic because this is something we've been stumping for since probably October. I mean, if you go back into Just Giants archives, first of all, congratulations if you want to do that. But we said, like, for all the way from who would our dream hire be to, we both said, I think John Harbaugh, if we can pry him loose some way, or if something, goes bad in Ravenland. And then we even talked about what kind of compensation if we really wanted him badly enough. And sure enough, as soon as he became available, we pounced. And I give a lot of credit to um, Giant ownership for that. This is John Mara's last chance at a hire and last chance for anything. And rather than going the tried and true route of picking a safe coordinator or someone in the family, they went for it and they were aggressive and they got him. So kudos to everybody involved.
Yeah, I actually want to start on that. Let's start
Mhm.
with the fact that there was a maximum effort to make sure that this deal passed through, and that effort included like a full court press of Joe Shane harassing John Harbaugh's agent is basically what we got from Ian O'Connor. Ian O'Connor was over this story from the very beginning and all the way through to the details that he chose not to share with Giants fans until after the deal was done. It's a long
Mhm.
saga, so we'll go through some of the highlights of it. But just
Mhm.
in order of thanks going around, you had Joe Shane constantly on John Harbaugh's agent. You had Chris Mara going to John Harbaugh's, initially and meeting with him there, making sure that all of his worries were squared away. Steve Tisch came in and flew John Harbaugh from Baltimore to the Giants. John Mara had actually moved around all of his cancer treatments so that he could be involved in every single meeting. Joe Shane and Chris Mara took him out to eat. They constantly involved with him. There was a secret second meeting that we're only finding out today on Monday between Chris Mara and John Harbaugh. There was a full court press of effort, and that also includes getting everything lined up so the Giants could not only be the first interview but the last interview that John Harbaugh goes through, which means completing your Rooney Rule process, doing your due diligence on any other person that you may want involved, like Kevin Stefanski, if the John Harbaugh thing goes through, if John Harbaugh doesn't get fired. They were on top of this from before it happened, and they closed. So I kind of want to talk a little bit. Well, I mean, I don't. Do you have anything to
Mhm.
say specifically to anything I just said?
A couple of things. One, in hindsight, and I don't know if the two go together, but the fact of they getting rid of Brian Dable so early in the process allowed them the opportunity to game plan what they were going to do. You can put, Coach X in that spot. It happened to be Harbaugh, but they were ready to pounce on the guy that they wanted immediately. So credit, if they were that foresighty about it, congratulations. Um, I think Joe Shane, knowing that, his job is on the line and, going after somebody who, the reports were wanted, if not complete control, wanted to have a GM that could with that will work with him and still going for that full court press and potentially risking his own job. I think that is honorable by him. Um, and yeah, for all the other pieces, doing what you have to do with the Giants are you know, a v- a multi-billion dollar corporation and they did not spare any expense and detail to get it done. So I just really you worry about this program for this team for the last several years. Are they falling behind the times? They just act like a mom and pop organization, and they were very modern in the way they did this. And kudos to them.
I want to talk a little bit about John Mara and his legacy because I think that this is a huge deal, and we'll get more into the specifics of why this is a huge deal, like as we talk through John Harbaugh. But John Mara's entered into ownership of this team at a very strange time, right? Like he kind of got handed the Giants were a mess. They had the league intervene to institute a general manager essentially to get them going in the right direction before John Mara takes over. You know, the team is rebuilding in the right direction. They had just went to a Super Bowl in 2001. They hired Tom Coughlin. I believe they promoted Jerry Reese from within 2004. They hire they draft Eli Manning, which was not an easy deal. They had to draft Phillip Rivers and do a draft day trade for Eli Manning. Big deal. And then they go to the Super Bowl in 2007. They win an improbable one. They have a good team in 2008 where things fall apart. It doesn't take long for them to rebound. 2011, they win another Super Bowl. But ever since then, it just felt like all the wrong pieces were being put in the wrong places. The head coach was getting older. And, it became time for the owner to step in and do actual work and not just own an enterprise, right? So you move on from, a legendary Super Bowl winning head coach and try and bring it in a modern direction with Ben McAdoo. It was a failure. You move on from Jerry Reese, who had clearly become, not a GM, and part of this like homegrown family thing, like you said, like a mom and pop shop, was very much how they operated, and they prided themselves on that of cultivating like a family. And of course, like, you want to pride yourself on treating people like family, but it is a business, and that means moving off from people that aren't working and not just coddling them until they
Yeah.
sink
Good.
your ship, right?
Here's an important thing. This is an important thing, Grumpy. The distinction between family and business is so important because you want to treat them like family, but because they're not family, that doesn't mean they have lifetime exemptions. And you learn
Correct.
that in business. If you own a business, you tell your employees, "Oh, we're a big family here." Don't ever say that, because if you think they think they're family, you can't fire me. I'm your brother. I'm
Yeah.
your cousin. So big distinction.
Yeah, in the middle of this also, I mean, John Mara had to try and bring the Giants into, a modern stadium. And
Mhm.
in some ways, it was a huge upgrade over Giants Stadium.
Oh,
I know MetLife is a dump, but, I think we're forgetting, like pretty much like one video board in Giant Stadium. I mean, it was
oh, just the money they're making for it. I would
from a functional
guarantee that
standpoint,
everybody ownership
it's,
thinks that's a huge success, that stadium.
yeah, I mean,
Huge.
however, in retrospect, it didn't go smoothly. It's now ranked among the lowest of all stadiums, and it very, very quickly. I mean, it's only like 15 years old. A little over
But
15 years old.
agreed. But again, even at this point, they make so much money off that
That's
stadium
that's
that
not my point.
that's
Hang with me.
yeah.
Hang with me on my point here.
Okay.
Every
Okay.
modernization that John Mara has tried to do has been kind of a stumble. They've done it, but not very gracefully, and that includes
Hmm.
MetLife Stadium. You know,
Fair.
um, they finally get to the point where they realize what this organization needs to turn around, but they can't get the GM and the head coach synced up. So they have Dave Gettleman comes in there, and they let him retire and whatever. They finally, what they think they're doing, moving on, is they get Joe Schoen in the building, right? And Joe Schoen is a very much modern GM. He beefs up their analytics department, approaches things in a much more methodical way of moving on from people in ways that may not be the family way. And Joe Schoen is very much not of the family, brought in from the outside. Dave Gettleman brought in from the outside, but not really. Had grown up
Mm.
as a scout through the Giants.
Right.
There was no ties with Joe Schoen. But there's still some hurdles, right? Like, Joe Schoen can't help the fact that there are two people in senior positions above him that have the last name of Mara or are related to a Mara. And
Hmm.
that creates a roadblock. In comes John Harbaugh, CEO style head coach. They recognize this is what they need, this is what they've wanted, and this is the only thing available, and it doesn't come available very often. So they recognize they brought him in. But John Harbaugh didn't sign initially, and we'll go through kind of the timeline of this in a second. But the most important thing is there was a hang-up about reporting structure and operational control. And I suspect that operational control did not have that much to do with Joe Schoen. It was reported that it was not Joe Schoen that was the roadblock, or at least it was hinted at that it wasn't really Joe Schoen. But it was, other operational things. I suspect it's, I need to be able to overrule somebody with the last name of Mara. Like, I need to be able to
Yeah.
do my job.
Yeah, Joe
And
Shane is
this
he's the
may be, if my speculation is correct, which it may not be, right? This would
Mhm.
be that final band-aid pull off of running this organization like a business and not like a family.
Other than John Mara passing away and somebody else who has a different perspective, even if it's a family member doing it. But yeah, absolutely. I don't think Joe
Well,
Shane was
I
any
mean, this was
roadblock at all, honestly.
just one little note. John Harbaugh wouldn't sign the contract until there was language in there that he preferred. So
Mhm.
if my speculation's right, whatever is written in that contract is written in that contract. So, you know,
I agree.
hope in writing, I guess hopefully that holds up as well as he wanted it to hold up. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
interrupt you.
I don't think Joe Shane was much of a holdup at all in any of this because again, this is a guy that's on his ninth life as it is. He doesn't have, that, doesn't have a Mara last name or a Mara influence at all. He's a little bit of a carpetbagger as far as this team is concerned. And quite frankly, he's not going to be here most likely next year. I think my gut feeling is once Harbaugh's in the building and once he kind of does an evaluation, especially what you reference as being a CEO styled head coach, is that he is going to have his thinking cap and his eyeglasses looking at everything that's run for the operation of the team, not just the purview of as a head coach. And he is going to make recommendations pretty quickly. And it's not just, hey, Joe Shane sucks, get rid of him, but I'm looking for X, I'm getting pushback from Y because I've been here, and that's going to be steamrolled rather quickly, I think. So I don't think really, again, I wasn't in the room, but my guess is that it was more of a, is Chris Mara going to say anything to me? Or, if I have a problem, I don't want to go through all this red tape. I want to go right to the source. And quite frankly, Harbaugh had hand. He had a lot of suitors. He'd have a job tomorrow if he decided he wanted a job anywhere. And he reached for the moon. And the Giants, to their credit, thought outside of their own box and gave it to him.
Yeah, I mean, it very well could have been Joe Shane being a pain in the ass. There was some level of reporting saying that Joe Shane can't negotiate. It becomes personal. I think that was part of a Pat Leonard article. Um, but the reason why I think it was less about Joe Shane is because it was later talked about how Joe worked fine with John and that he wasn't the problem. You know, I don't know who to believe. I don't know if we'll ever,
Who knows?
whatever. But at the end of the day, this is something that Joe Shane can hang his hat on. If John Harbaugh's a good coach, I don't see why he wouldn't want to agree with him. You know what I mean? Like if
Mhm.
I think
Yep.
that Joe Shane probably overworked to his coach's specifications by drafting guys like Deontay Banks in the first round and moving up to do it. Moving back into the first round for Dable's preferred quarterback over his own. It was
Yep.
speculated that he was more a Shedeur Sanders guy, but because Brian Dable wanted Jackson Dart, not only did he draft him, he had to trade into the first round to make it happen. Like, significant moves had to be made. And I think that
And
the
I
hiring process of a head coach is another box that you can check for him as a GM. And I personally believe that Joe Shane is a below average GM, but I don't see why he would. I can understand, you know, wanting head coach off of GM responsibilities, right? And being like, I do my job, you do your job kind of thing. But it is somewhat of a collaborative process anyway. I don't know that too much would have been that. I mean, and Bobby brought up the big point would be something like John Harbaugh has a problem with a different front office member that's an employee of Joe Shane and preferring his own. And now you sort of have somebody else's cooks in your kitchen kind of thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, now it's almost like you're hiring your own replacement,
Can I
potentially.
throw out a conspiracy theory? And maybe it's not a conspiracy theory, but I guess I want your opinion on this.
Mm.
Is it possible that Joe Shane is still here only through the draft process and free agency, and then he moves on after that?
Yeah.
That we're far enough along, we're in mid-January now, and they're in the middle of their talent evaluations for the draft and all these different things. And maybe as part of a negotiation and a settlement was Joe Shane stays through this. We get past the draft and then he moves on his own terms, and then we have a new GM after. So instead of upsetting the apple cart of what started, am I completely crazy with that, or is that a possibility?
No, I mean, like, there's precedent, right? Other teams have done that where they fire the GM after the draft. They let them do their thing, and because they've
Mhm.
already started the work, they wanted them to finish the work and then moved on. I don't think that's going to happen, though.
That's fair. Yeah,
I mean,
just
like, but I don't think I don't think it's crazy. Like I said, there's
mhm.
precedent. Other teams have done it. I just don't think that's going to happen. I just think that this was such a slow band-aid rip to bring them into the and really it's not so much that Brian Dable isn't John Harbaugh. I mean, we know that now in retrospect, but Brian Dable was a first-time head coach. There's not so much to know he's ran a modern offense. That could have been part of the modernization. This is what the good teams are doing, are hiring the hot young coordinator and the hot
Mhm.
name coordinator, and then moving forward from there. But I think the fact that they were willing to put whatever John Harbaugh was worried about in writing into the contract is that final rip of the band-aid and bringing them into the modern world. Um, I don't think I think Joe Shane is a part of that. Even if I do think Joe Shane is a below average GM, um, I think that his processes are still very modern, and I think Joe Shane's biggest hangups are repeating mistakes. So if he can stop doing that, if he has
Right.
another voice in there with control, it's like, dude, we've got to move on from this fucking kicker. Like, we can't do this. You know,
Well, that's where I think having a John Harbaugh coming in instead of a Brian Dable, where Brian Dable just doesn't think that's important. Where I think a John Harbaugh is like dotting every I and crossing every T and being like, "Uh-oh, we have a potential problem here with kicker. Address this.
yeah.
You
What you
do
mean,
that."
John Harbaugh being somebody who oversees everything from a CEO perspective and cares about all three phases of the game, unlike Dable, or somebody who has experience in building a roster of 20 years, working with someone like, or both, I
Well,
guess.
both kind of, but
Okay.
I was referring to the former, but
Okay.
honestly, both. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that because other than the only thing we can really, well, I don't know actually, because and it's, yeah, maybe they were a little reckless building the offensive line, but they did build it. But I mean, like, the
Mhm.
wide receiver depth was absolute trash, and they didn't really, they didn't, like, the fact that they, like, waited so long to bring in Isaiah Hodgins, which, whatever you may
And
think of
that's
him,
the
it's just
part.
such a cheap depth addition. It's like, why didn't you do this from the beginning? There's no reason you couldn't have done this earlier, just as a safety net. Even if he never
Yeah,
plays, it was a smart idea.
defenders are going to be like, well, there was so much to build. They started with nothing, but something like bringing in Isaiah Hodgins in the middle of the season has got nothing to do with an overall plan
Yeah.
and dealing with the salary cap. That's a low hanging fruit thing that's a plug and play just to get me through these couple weeks, and it took too long to do. That's being a
Same thing.
little asleep at the wheel.
I would say the same thing in the offensive line. They did build it. I think that they had a
Mhm.
comparable offensive line for 2 years now. Unfortunate that they all got hurt in 2024, but it's the same line that they had in 2024 that
Yep.
they had in 2025, and it was a good line. I think it was above average around the league in all categories. Perhaps not really run blocking. I'm not sure, but they
The only
they,
real
fum-
bust
they
they got was Evan Neal out of all the guys they acquired. I mean,
but
JMS
but
is
they
still,
they fumbled their way through it. I mean, it took them forever.
yeah,
They
yeah.
they they drafted John Michael Schmitz with nobody else on the roster. They let somebody like John Feliciano walk when they could have signed John Feliciano and still drafted John Michael Schmitz. They there were things they could have done that wouldn't have been so reckless. Even Jermaine Illuminor they brought in to play guard, and only because Evan Neal was
They
so fucking unplayable that they put him at tackle. It was like, oh look, we found a tackle. It was like
They like to
almost an
fire the
accident.
net a little too often, and you can't do that in this league because, especially teams like the Giants, where the worst thing always seems to happen, you better be prepared for any eventuality, and we don't seem to worry about that. And that has to be a philosophical change that hopefully a guy who's been around this league for 20 years plus is gonna be like, that's not the way we're operating anymore.
So, I guess just some things to talk about with John Harbaugh. Obviously,
Mhm.
won a Super Bowl in 2012. The same year, he fired his offensive coordinator mid-year. I had received a lot of pushback from Ravens fans telling me that he was forced to do that by the front office. So I tried to look that up. Um, I'll admit that I'm not a Ravens fan, and I don't pay attention to every bit of Ravens news. But I
Right?
was also at least in my 20s when that happened, and very much in tune with the NFL. And I didn't remember
Sure.
hearing anything of that sort. There was one article that speculated that, and then I read a chapter from a book written about that team with interviews from the owner, the GM, and John Harbaugh. And the story does not say that he was forced into doing anything. That was his
It sounds like
decision.
sour grapes. Is what that sounds like,
That
honestly.
sounds like a fan base that is wants to move on from a head coach that is also immediately the best head coach worth hiring, and that's a difficult. I
Yeah.
think it's just a difficult thing to work through in your brain. I'm not saying it was the wrong move for the team, the organization, whatever, but that also doesn't mean that he was completely inept and carried by a front office and carried by Lamar Jackson and carried by, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I think that I truly do believe, after reading everything that I could find, which, by the way, I only found one speculative report that speculated that ownership forced him to do it because ownership wasn't on board with Cam Cameron to begin with, and he was John Harbaugh's friend. The point isn't moving off of him. The point is moving off of him in the middle of the year, and he made
Yeah.
the decision on the bus. You know what I mean? Like, that's how it happened. He called the owner when he got home, which they don't usually talk until Monday.
Hmm.
John Harbaugh always had this relationship where he spoke to the owner every single week. He reported directly to the owner in Baltimore, which was another thing that he worked into his contract here, which is not how things are run here. But they usually
Hmm.
wait until Monday after a win or a loss so that they can be on even emotions. Same reason we do the
Just
podcast
like our
today.
show.
Yep. But instead, he called him Sunday night, and then they got the GM on the phone as well because he was telling them he was going to fire Cam Cameron the next day.
Mhm.
And they were unable to talk him out of it. And they warned him that he was going to be criticized for doing something like that. That's all according to all three sources in the book that I read. So, um, hirings and firings, the right people at the right times, I think are a big deal with John Harbaugh. And so the next coming weeks are going to be really interesting where we get the coordinators on board because we have vacancies at both offense and defense. And quite frankly, vacancies at offensive and defensive identities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I
I
mean,
mean,
the front runner seems to. Anything on John Harbaugh?
well, I was going to say, the identity thing is interesting because we have a quarterback in Jackson Dart where, until we see that John Harbaugh is all in on Jackson Dart, don't make the assumption that we are absolutely going to be tailoring an offense around him and he is the future going forward. There is going to be a bit, I'm assuming, one of the reasons why John Harbaugh took this job is the appeal of Jackson Dart. But until we see that, you know, don't make that automatic assumption. The firing of Cam Cameron is just, that's out of the box, but I guess that's why some coaches are great and some are other. They identify a problem. It's, what ought to be done eventually should be done immediately. So I'd rather have that than just, especially in this market where, if the defense is bad and they're going to be taking shots at your defensive coordinator every single week until the noise is so loud. I'd rather have a guy who, you know, proactively does something, but doesn't necessarily do it knee jerk reaction wise. And I'm sure in your reading and everything that it wasn't a knee jerk decision to fire him. It was it
Oh
was
no,
it was
it was a slow burn over. The
it,
offense was throwing for under 200 yards a game. Even though
yeah.
they were winning, they were like 9-3, 9-4. You know, they were putting way
So
too much on the defense. And from what I was reading too, is they would practice something all week with Cam Cameron and go with a game plan, and then day of he would pivot the game plan to what he felt his gut would do, and it caused a
oh boy.
lot of havoc. And then you had players in the locker room, specifically defenders, who were veterans. Guys like Ed Reed.
Yeah.
Stepping up and getting frustrated that the defense was doing all the work and had to do all the work for them to continue to win. So I mean, there were a lot of he was the contract I believe was set to expire at the end of the year. So they were planning on just moving off of him kind of gracefully. But then you're 9-4.
You're 9-3. You're going for
You
the one seed in your
exactly
conference and
just
things. Yeah.
if there's something wrong, fix it now. Don't wait to fix it. And that's what he
Yeah.
did. So,
Good.
um,
Good.
yeah, I agree. It was good. In regards to Jackson Dart, Jackson Dart was part of the interview process. He sat with Jackson Dart for about 2 hours. He was part of the appeal of coming there. But
Mhm.
frankly, I think the Giants fans are going to have a tough time listening to this. But we've been doing the show for a long time through many quarterbacks now, between Eli Manning, Daniel Jones, all the scrubs in between that had to jump in. I
Yep.
remember when we drafted Ryan Nassib, and if that meant
Mm-hmm.
anything, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Jackson Dart is somebody that I really like, and I think has an it factor, and is somebody that the Giants can possibly build their future around. But it is not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee, and um, I think and hope that John Harbaugh is going to institute stuff to get the most out of his development and make him the best player he can be. But they have 5 years. John Harbaugh will have 4 years with Jackson Dart. I think he's already had a successful rookie campaign, but he will have 4 years working with him to decide if he is the franchise or not. And if you want to give him, you know, I don't know. There's no guarantee that he's going to remain here. But what I can say is that John Harbaugh had a hand in developing Joe Flacco, who's an FCS quarterback with some serious question marks coming into the league, and won a Super Bowl with him. He had Lamar Jackson, a completely different kind of quarterback, ran a completely different kind of offense because of it, and made him
Yep.
a league MVP. So I think that he will have success with Jackson Dart because I think Jackson Dart has enough skills to be successful in the right environment. So he just has to be placed in that environment.
It's to be determined if he'll be successful, but the most important thing, he's willing to adapt based on what he has.
Right.
Going for Lamar Jackson, that requires having a very unique offense around a very unique skill set and a very unique
And
quarterback.
also,
And
you have to be willing to be patient in developing him. He is not Lamar
100%.
Jackson today the same way he was the day he was drafted. Just anything else is
Right.
revisionist history. It really just
And,
is.
and he came here knowing that this roster's not ready to compete for a Super Bowl this year. This quarterback's not ready to compete for a Super Bowl this year. So the fact he's not shying away from a longer term project with that's not going to be a plug and play type of quarterback, never mind a plug and play experienced quarterback, that gives me hope as well that he's embracing this challenge because, you know, if Harbaugh would have waited, there's a job now in Western New York that's available. That if he was, trying to chase a Super Bowl or win right now, was there for the taking. There were several other jobs that, a lot of pros and cons too, but he picked this one and he was open to accepting it early. So that tells you something about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he canceled his interview with the Titans. He always had it
Yeah.
in his back pocket as leverage and whatever, right? But at the end of the
Hmm.
day, he was ready to put all those meetings on hold to make sure that whatever was worrying him about the Giants job could go
Yeah.
through the way he wanted it to. So now I guess we get to the point where we speculate a little bit on coordinators. It
Sure.
seems that I guess I've been alluding to this and I haven't quite said it yet, which is stupid. But so uh, Wednesday night is when the news sort of kind of broke that John Harbaugh is the eventual Giants head coach. It was close
Yes.
to midnight, but that nothing's been signed yet. But like all signs are pointing in that direction, and you get it from Adam Schefter suddenly, who had been otherwise quiet on the subject. It sounds like
It was
it's
the
going to
it
happen.
was the one night I went to sleep early.
Yeah,
And of course I wake up in the morning and my phone was like levitating with all the buzzes and the text and everything.
but it hadn't happened yet. And Thursday there was there's no concerning snag, but there was a snag. Nothing had been
Right.
signed still. Um, you know, lots of nice things being said, and there's a lot to be excited about. But like in terms of conversations with Joe Shane went incredibly well. I can definitely work with him. Things like that are being
Mm.
said, but still nothing. And then on the 16th, still nothing. This might go deep into the night or even tomorrow. This might happen on Sunday. It's about reporting structure now. You know, suddenly John Harbaugh's not so confident that he's going to be the Giants head coach. Although Giants fans didn't find that out until after the fact. On, the 17th, there's still a little bit more back and forth, but the contract has been sent to John Harbaugh, and then it's confirmed later that day that he is the head coach. So there was a lot of back and forth, and there were some sticking points that Harbaugh was not willing to move off of. So that's the timeline. I feel like I've been alluding it, and I didn't actually go through it. So there's
Yeah.
that. And now that that's like cleared the way, even though it's been in the news cycle
Well,
for a while, what, you got something?
before you jump to what you're about to say, what was your concern level the longer the time went? Because I know we were on internal text with other people and just people you speak with. I definitely got a sense that people got a lot more nervous about it than I was. I really never thought that this wasn't going to happen once once the Shefty thing came out and we saw the initial reports. I thought it was just this may take a few days to get sorted out. I wasn't in a rush for it to get sorted out immediately. We're not go up against signing day or anything. But a lot of people got very antsy. How are you about this?
0% worried. And that's
Me
not to
too.
say that there wasn't something to worry about, right? Like there was legitimately things that sides were going to have to concede on, and
Yes.
perhaps media members were being way too flippant about that by saying like there's nothing to see here. Like there is a thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like I think that we were being either lied to or led astray in some regard on that. But that doesn't mean that I was worried. And part of it is because I didn't think the Giants could afford to not give him what he needed. They had
Yeah.
pushed way too hard at this point. He was everything that they asked for, everything that they wanted. I just couldn't see a scenario in which they held on to what John Harbaugh wanted. You know what I mean? I just
Yeah,
couldn't see it happening. And I think if this hiring happened 20 years ago before the advent of Twitter, we would have barely heard a word about it when, you know what I mean? Like we wouldn't have been
yep.
tracking people's planes and like whatever. So I and not for nothing, like every corner of every market of NFL media was all over this like it was fucking 9/11. Like
Yeah.
truly, like you had people just not even giving updates anymore. They were just saying the same bunch of
Yeah.
words every couple of hours like they were saying something new, and it was just like, and it ate up
Stephen A.
engagement.
Smith already
You
went
had
both
people writing
sides
the
even
same
before anything
fucking
happened.
article. I think I read the
Yeah.
same article 70 times with a new paragraph added to it every single
Yeah.
time. It was so silly. Again, like I don't blame anyone for getting stressed. I just think that that's a symptom of our instantaneous news now and reporting on things that aren't quite done yet. And I'm not saying that this was business as usual contract stuff. I wasn't worried because I couldn't see a way in which the Giants were going to let this get away.
Let,
It was too much, and they'd been way too public about it too.
let's be honest. This team needed not only, on the field success to change, they also needed their culture to change and their perception of them to change. They had to go all in and make this happen. The only way this actually does happen is if John Harbaugh says, I want to be the coach of the Giants. And once he made that call, he owned all the leverage because
Mm-hmm.
he knew the Giants are desperate.
Mm-hmm.
They're much more desperate than he was. He had some other options. 8 if he would have waited for Buffalo. Giants needed him. And to me, once you're at that kind of agreement, the hardest part is I want you, you want me. You know, I want I want this org structure. I want this pay. I want this thing. That all gets worked out. If you want to make a deal, you'll make a deal. The hardest part in these deals is agreeing that you want to make a deal. So once it happened, I was like, let me know when it's signed. I'm not concerned about it, no matter what little nook and cranny we heard along the way.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of how I felt. But I don't blame anyone for getting stressed. If you were one of those people that got like tapped into every little update, like it's natural to have gotten stressed.
We
So you're
we've had
not
a
nuts.
decade. We've had a decade at least of being Giant fans where everything has gone wrong.
Sure.
Everything. Oh, we draft Daniel Jones, he gets hurt. We get this coach, we like him, he sucks. Everything. We're getting a new stadium, it blows. So everything we're returning to Jet fans where we're expecting the worst thing to happen. So it
It's
is
so true
natural for it.
because like that was the sentiment, was just like how are we gonna fuck this up, was very much the sentiment around, was that we were gonna screw this up and lose them. So I just wasn't one of them. That's all.
Me neither. Me neither.
The speculation that he's gonna bring Monken in with him. There was some idea that Monken and his system and whatever was holding back Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. Maybe that's true, right? But Lamar Jackson actually is an NFL MVP at this point now. And, he can probably fit into a variety of different systems that are possibly less rigid and let him play more loose. I don't know their lives as well as I know anything. But what I do know is that Jackson Dart is not Lamar Jackson. Not yet. Um, they are different in a lot of ways, but Jackson Dart has plenty to work on. He's had an exciting rookie year. but it's a lot to throw on the shoulders of somebody that had stuff to work on anyway. He needs to get better at play action, reading the field, playing under center. There's a lot of different things. I think even some accuracy stuff. His footwork needs to get better. So there's a lot of stuff. And I think that Todd Monken is probably a really good fit in terms of it's something that can ease John Harbaugh into this job. Will work well with Jackson Dart probably. I have to do a lot more work on somebody to say that, but I didn't find it useful to do that work until ink went to paper.
Right.
But
I,
Monken from your college stuff.
from Georgia, yeah, and I'm not going to have any Georgia bias on this, but I will say one thing that's very, very important. Um, Stetson Bennett is basically looks like me, basically the same size as me, a very, very, very average quarterback. And with Todd Monken, they won back-to-back national titles. And in that second title, if you go back and watch those playoff games into the championship game, Stetson Bennett was not a game manager. He won that game for him. He was making big time throws into, small spaces and commanding that offense. And we're talking about Stetson Bennett, a guy who's had more arrests for public disorderly than NFL starts in his career. So that's what tell you what kind of quarterback he actually is. And he took this guy that was basically a walk-on and won back-to-back national titles in the toughest conference in football. So that pedigree alone, and Jackson Dart is not Stetson Bennett. Jackson Dart has a lot more natural ability. So that makes me encouraged right off the bat.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously nothing's confirmed yet. We don't have the press conference is later today for everybody listening. This coming out at 9:30. Press conference is today at noon. So we'll hear a little bit from John Harbaugh. I expect interviews and stuff will happen later on.
Well, I'm more worried, honestly, that Monken gets a job, like a head coaching job, than he is not coming here as a
It's
coordinator.
not a foregone conclusion. I think he's already interviewed, I think, twice in Cleveland. But
Mhm.
we'll see. I mean, there's more candidates being added into the. Mike McDaniel comes with some really good pedigree. He's on the Kevin Stefanski. Obviously, he's not going to go to Cleveland, but he's out there. Mike McCarthy is still out there, and now Sean McDermott is out there.
Stefanski's going to Atlanta.
Oh, is that confirmed?
Yes, last night.
Okay, there you go. So Stefanski, but I mean, that's also one vacancy gone.
Right.
So there, and you still have other candidates that are running playoff teams, right? You have Chris Shula
Yeah,
in LA is still a
sure.
hot name out there. Clint Kubiak in Seattle still a name that's out there. So there's that as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Vance Joseph, also defensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos, is still out there as well. So
Yeah.
as much as there's openings, there's candidates. There's
Mhm.
legit candidates out there. So
Sure.
it's possible that Monken gets a job, but I don't know. Do you think so in your gut? Does your gut tell you that Monken's going to be a head coach next year?
My gut says he'll be here for at least a year. And if we see significant strides with Jackson Dart, maybe the record may not necessarily reflect it, but we show significant strides, he'll get a job somewhere else.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel.
Mhm.
Um, on the defensive side of the ball, I think anything goes. There's
Sure.
this push for like Jim Leonard among fans and I guess reporters saying whatever. I don't know much about Jim Leonard other than he was a former player. I know that he coached at Wisconsin
Hmm.
before jumping over to Denver, but that's kind of all I know. So I'll look into him too. But
Hmm.
we're gonna find out fairly soon. So I'm
Yeah,
probably
I'm more
I
interested in
don't I
talking
don't
about
think
who we
this is gonna
got
be
than.
a long process. Do you?
Do you think it's no, I think it's to be a quicker process. I think he wants to get his staff and everything ready to go so they can go through the whole offseason process. Like when is senior day or senior bowl? It's next
Next
week,
week.
week after. Yeah, you guys are heading out there. So I think he wants to get this sooner than later finished so he can have as much of his staff to start the evaluation process. I mean, it's one thing to evaluate players, it's another thing to know if those players you're evaluating are going to fit to what you're trying to do. And
Yeah.
if you don't have that coach yet, you're not really 100% sure what you know what you're going to be doing yet. So I think there's going to be a push to get things done as faster than as fast as possible.
Yeah. I think so too. So we'll. I believe also that one of the things that was sort of a hang up, not one of the bigger hang ups, but one of the was that they've always had a very large support staff in Baltimore, and that
Mhm.
included large departments of support staff that meant high coach salaries and coordinator salaries. Like they made that job attractive for the best talent to come in there, and talent being, the coaching system and support staff. So it was, building up, the analytics department was important to John Harbaugh, and I believe also coach salaries, right? So if he knew, once you
Well,
have the okay to spend on those things, I think it makes hiring the guys that you want a lot easier.
and if Joe Shane is like, oh, he modernized the analytics of everything, he should be, that should be very aligned with John Harbaugh, and it shouldn't be that much. We're not going from an abacus to a supercomputer.
Correct. Yeah. Um. All right. Let's talk about this weekend in playoffs.
Oh, great. Loved it.
Um. You want to go in reverse order, starting with last night and
Let's do it. Yeah.
okay. So last night's game was L.A. and who the hell did they beat? The L.A. Rams beat
Chicago.
Chicago. Yeah, what
It's
an
so cold,
exciting
I can't
game.
remember.
No, I can't remember because I was super tired, but I stayed up for the whole game. I was just tired all day.
Yeah.
Exciting game. Came down to the Caleb Williams pulled a game tying touchdown completely out of his ass, and the,
That's a
I don't
Sega
even
football move, is all that is.
I
A
don't
Tecmo Bowl
even
move.
want to like give him credit for it, because like this was very much like the David Tyree throw, where it's just like, fuck it, I have a receiver over there. Like he was not
Hmm.
open. That was an ill-advised throw. He could have just thrown the ball away. I think like it wasn't fourth down or anything like that, but he just kind
Yeah,
of
it
launched
was.
it.
The touchdown?
The touchdown was fourth down.
It was fourth down. That's
Okay,
why
never
he
mind.
ran back
Then it was
40
worth it.
yards. It was desperation time. Yeah, that was the season. Yeah, that's what made it so amazing.
The cat, I don't even know what the defender was doing. I know they were like calling for a push off. That wasn't like a subtle put. They just like tripped and then misjudged where the ball was coming from and was way too shallow in coverage to make a play on the ball.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And then, I mean, all the games yesterday were just
Then
turnover
he
worthy, but there was just turnovers all over the place. He just completely made up for it by in overtime throwing a stupid fucking pick. Which I know the
it was a
receiver
Corey
stopped
Webster.
running. The receiver stopped running. I get
Yeah.
it, but like I'm not so sure I wanted to make that throw anyway.
Yeah. That was a Corey Webster. Exactly what it reminded me of like you get in overtime and all of a sudden, oh, that was out of nowhere. I
Yeah,
mean, honestly, that was, as it's playing out in real time, of all the scenarios going to happen, probably the last thing in my mind was throwing a pick in that moment. It was just like, that's what makes sports so great. And you know, that's why they get so much money for TV contracts, because you can't write scripts for stuff like that. You can't write scripts for that crazy pass at the end of regulation. And you can't write a script that all of a sudden there was just this terrible pick, which completely changed. And that place was rocking, and all of a
oh
sudden it
yeah,
was dead.
yeah.
And they kicked that field goal, it was like a pin drop in there.
I love the way that everything happened. I thought it was exciting. And I think it just reinforces that the Bears are for real. Ben Johnson is for real. Caleb Williams is for real, even though he is still developing, I think. I think that reinforces our conversation about the NFC North being a legit conference of
Hmm?
strong rivalries and strong teams and good action. So I'm happy with that. The Rams moving forward, it continues that Sean McVay thing. Matt Stafford is being probably the best quarterback playing right now when you factor in experience with ability.
You mean the best quarterback left in this playoffs, or period?
I guess left in the playoffs. I guess I'd rather have Josh Allen or something.
Hmm.
But he's
Oh yeah, I mean,
I don't know, but the Rams continuing forward. It's not like a fluky team winning in overtime and just kind of
no.
Cinderellaing like themselves to a championship. Like I legit feel like the Rams are really really good,
They,
and so are the Seattle Seahawks.
they went from a dome team playing in Southern California into brutal conditions in a very hostile environment against a very good team and won. I don't
Well,
care if
Matt
you win by
Stafford
one.
played in the NFC North for most of his career, so
Mhm.
I wasn't too worried about him specifically. But everybody else, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And it's also like, I lived in Florida for 20 years, but doesn't mean I still don't get really, really hot and uncomfortable when I go back down there. So it's that was just it was really impressive. That there's coaching rivalries developing all over the place. I think did I see something also with Ben Johnson and McVay after the game too or something? Did that happen?
I I had it on, but I at that point stopped paying attention, so I was probably milling around
Yeah.
the kitchen, whatever.
I think it's just, it's a little bit of a sign of if we move on. It's just a little dose of reality check for Ben Johnson because you know how unbearable he would have been if they would have won that game because you
Mm.
could see already feeding off that energy from the Packer game and stuff. So just a little good riddance for you a little bit for my own personal take.
Um, but great game the whole way through. That one was close the whole
Absolutely.
time. Um,
Sure.
going back to earlier in the day, much less good game. The Patriots and Texans. You know, we were talking throughout this game a little bit. Patriots kind
Mhm.
of pulled away from this one. There were like 9 turnovers in this game. CJ
Yeah.
Stroud probably accounted for 8 of them. If he could have accounted for 8.5, he would have found a way. But
Yeah.
in all fairness, the Texans were beat up and getting further beat up as the game went on. It became
Yeah.
like CJ Stroud had 0 seconds in the pocket, and it was
Mhm.
the right side was just completely playing on crutches, and he would get to the back end of his drop, and he had at least one guy already grabbing him.
Mhm.
So he was not really in position to be playing well. I mean, some of the turnovers themselves you can look at, and he threw one directly to a defender when he was on a rollout, like
There was
there's
one
no
tip pass,
excuse for
like,
that. Yeah, but I mean,
yeah, one
in
was up.
general, it felt
Yeah, he
like
was not good.
it felt like two really good defenses playing for like the first quarter and a half, and
Mhm.
by the end of the second quarter, Houston was so hurt it just felt like the Patriots were dominating, even though the score was close. And then the second half, the Patriots just took over.
Let me ask you, Coach Grump, would you have pulled CJ at halftime?
I don't. Who the hell was their backup even? Maybe, but again, like
Uh,
I don't know if
yeah.
I could blame
It
him.
doesn't really matter. I mean, and
Yeah,
the thing is that's kind of a philosophical question. It's like,
yeah.
this is the guy, this
It
is,
was
who
getting
you
out of
brought to the
control.
dance. This is your guy. He's playing poorly, but he's the guy who's been prepping all week. He's been the guy who's been prepping all year. And all of a sudden you're going to bring in a backup? uh,
Well,
it's
what got me thinking
Davis
about it,
Mills? Or,
uh, it might be Davis
yeah.
Mills, but I don't know, possibly. It was at least approaching the point of like this is out of control. He's in his head now. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, but it does bring you to this, right?
Hmm.
CJ Stroud is someone I was never fully on board with coming out of the draft. Now, obviously, guys can develop, they can change. I can be wrong. I've been wrong many times before. I'm not afraid to admit it. But just not somebody that coming out of the draft, I was like, oh, yeah, I can definitely see this. It was just like, okay, there's some stuff here for sure. I don't know if he's going to work out. And he's thus far performed better than I expected. But at this point today, I feel like I am going to give CJ Stroud his 5th year option, but I am A, not rushing into extension talks yet, and B, I'm going to acquire assets to be able to move on from him after that 5th year option, just in case I feel like I need to. Because I could see this just being the ceiling for CJ Stroud. Just someone who needs a really good team around him to be comparable and will never be anything more than that. And I don't know how often you can win Super Bowls like that. And I think the only time you can win Super Bowls with somebody like that is when they're on a rookie contract. Somebody that needs all good talent around them to put them over the hump and not be like I think I said it perfectly in a text to you is I don't blame CJ Stroud for not being able to win a game by putting an injured team on his back and beating a very good New England Patriots team. I don't blame him for that right now. But if I'm going to pay him franchise money, he needs to be able to win the big game by putting it on him. He's going to have to be the guy that can just make every good throw. And in this game, not only was he not that guy, he was quite the opposite. He was terrible in this
Yeah.
game. Again, don't blame him, but only while he's on that rookie contract.
Well,
I'm
this
not
is
paying
where
franchise money to somebody who looks like that when things go wrong.
this is an inflection point of where good teams are organizationally as opposed to, poor teams. The Giants, you know, with Daniel Jones, they kind of put themselves in a position where they had to give him an extension
Correct.
because they had no other options. They weren't prepared for that moment of should I get off the pot. They kind of had to be pot committed with Daniel Jones. There's still enough time right now at CJ Stroud where you can make that I don't have to make that call, but I don't have to be forced to signing an extension for somebody because, as we all know, just because you're moving off somebody, the replacement cost, if even available. I mean,
Mhm.
they're not going to be a bad team. They're not going to be a team that's going to have 3 wins and you can just, you know, luck yourself into the number 2 pick in the draft and get a franchise guy. They might be, but based on the talent they have and the defense and everything, have to give a considerable draft capital if they want to, draft the replacement of CJ Stroud. So,
So
you know,
I mean, I could talk about this for a really long time, and I don't want to like bleed
yeah,
our thing, but I'm agreeing with you. In that, with CJ Stroud has had a very stable start to his career. He's had the same coach, and obviously it's been a short time. But Daniel Jones we're moved off of different coaches, different offensive
yeah, yeah,
coordinators,
yeah, yeah,
different GMs,
yeah.
and all those things add times where it's like, give him another chance. And you get stuck at the end of that rookie contract where I'm not gonna say that the 4-year deal he got was perfect or anything like that, but you are stuck where you have to give him something, and he had a lot of leverage, being that he just suddenly was very good. So it becomes tricky then. But that being that, and then the
You
other
have to
thing is,
factor everything, though. It's just,
yeah,
you can't just say, "Oh, bad break. I'm going to go with you anyway," just so you had a bad,
but
the
you
way
but you
things
only
went.
really get like 1 year of decent evidence of what you've got. So you don't
Yeah,
have enough time to make that decision, but you have to make that decision then. So
but it's a big
you
risk. Yeah,
you're kind of
becomes very
stuck.
risky.
Whereas with CJ
Yeah,
Stroud, so far it's been very stable. If he makes it to year 5 without any coaching changes and maybe only one offensive coordinator change, and he's still the same guy, then it's a different story. And the important thing is that you just get enough ammunition to move around in the first round. In the
yeah.
last 20 years, in 20 years of data, there are 85% of drafts have 2 quarterbacks at or more worth drafting in the first round. 2 or more. Those are guys that got a second contract, went into
Mhm.
the playoffs, were worth something, you know what I mean? And that's
Right.
that's that's not counting guys like Kirk Cousins who were drafted in the 3rd round,
Mhm.
or Russell Wilson who was drafted in the
And
3rd round. That's not counting those guys.
and also, don't let one terrible performance, that just happened 17 hours ago, give you the definitive, I know what CJ Stroud is, I'm ready to move on. I think a
Right.
lot of people are super, super down on him right now, but he's, this is what, his 3rd year?
Mhm.
I mean, he still has another year. I mean, when they pick up that 5th year, whenever, but there's still a
They
whole
have
nother
to they have
year
to decide on it at the end of this season.
of this season.
Yeah, they
So
have
they'll
to
def- the,
exercise it or not.
so it's most, I
I
would
would
say
exercise it.
95% chance they will.
Yes.
The question is about the extension, what you do from there. And there is still time for that.
Yes.
Because even if they haven't made that decision, I don't see the CJ Stroud market out there of 20 teams like, I'm ready to give this guy $400 million,
Yeah.
which may
No,
not have been the same with Daniel Jones as well. But
it's true.
my point is, let's see continued like a trend of in big games and on the road looking like shit before we're like,
That's my
no,
point.
no dice.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and that's my point is he has to be able to win a big. It doesn't have to be the game in the playoffs that year, whatever. He just has to show that when everything goes wrong, C.J. Stroud can make it right. And if he's that guy that he can, or he has an it factor, right, which is
Yeah.
somewhat the same thing, but like,
Sure.
yeah,
You
yeah.
saw a
So
guy 3 hours later do it. Caleb Williams had that it factor. Everything was going
absolutely,
wrong, and yeah,
yeah. Um, Going into Saturday now, we had was the NFC game, was the late night game, was Seattle and San Francisco, right? That was the night game.
yeah, I had to impale Cranky wife off the floor after that was over. That was it's one of those games when you see the opening kickoff going back for touchdown, you're like, well,
Hmm.
you may want to put the Knicks on now because that just you knew that was going to go bad. They were Cinderella, at midnight. They a fantastic job getting to where they are with all the injuries and everything, but when things started going bad, they were never coming back from that game.
Amen. I mean, you said it. They might be the best coached team in the NFL.
Mhm.
And I think that there's plenty of the evidence is actually just how far they were able to get this year
Yeah.
with everything they were dealing with from the beginning of the year to now. But I think their fate was sealed last weekend when George Kittle got hurt. That was the last thing that they could have survived. You cannot keep advancing and play better and better teams getting more and more hurt, and that is too integral of a piece. They didn't have the proper replacement, and that was
Like,
showing itself. You
I
cannot beat a
actually thought
playoff team without him.
I actually thought their fate was sealed when they lost to Seattle in that last game of the regular season. It was kind of like, you get an easier path in the
Mm.
playoffs. You're playing at home. The furthest, this would have been crazy if they would have been home field throughout. Their biggest road trip would have been going to San Francisco for the press conference because that's how far it is from Santa Clara.
Mm.
So like everything was lined up for them. And when they lost that last game and lost home field throughout, that was to me like there's too many mountains to climb. And then when Caleb goes down, you knew that this was going to be a bloodletting, and sure
Wait,
enough.
they lost first seed in the final game of the year.
If they would have won out, they would have been the 1 seed, and they lost to Seattle at home.
San Francisco was 12 and
Yes,
5. Seattle was 14 and 3.
they would have been both and had 13 wins, and they would have had the tiebreaker.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right. That's crazy. I did not realize that.
yeah.
But I mean,
They won that
you know
game.
what? I still don't think that the home field thing would have accounted for that much. They're just too hurt. I don't think they were
Yeah.
beating Seattle at home anyway.
Who they have played this week?
But eventually they would have had to play Seattle.
Yeah. But maybe get a little healthier. I don't know.
I mean, unless LA beats Seattle before them, if it falls that way. But
then they're gonna play LA. So,
yeah, I don't know.
a different
I think
challenge.
Their fate was sealed. I don't think it
Yeah.
involved the home field advantage. Probably didn't help that they were playing in Seattle, but that was
Losing
a
Kittle
certified
was the end of it.
ass
Yeah.
whooping, absolute ass whooping. I fully believe now with the way the Rams have played both against Carolina and then down to the wire against Chicago. I think Seattle's going to the Super Bowl now on the NFC side.
You think you think is going in?
Seattle, without a doubt.
Seattle's going in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think
too.
LA has been playing it close for too long. They can get away with that against the Rams. They can get away with that against a young quarterback with Caleb Williams. They're not going to be able to get away with that against Seattle. And that's me just, that's propping up Sam Darnold there, which I don't do often.
I also think, something, I think that was a whole load of shit, this oblique thing they talked about this week too.
I don't know if it was a load of shit. I think they just like everything else becomes a bigger story than like he popped like you even texted me. I didn't even know what happened. I read about it. I was like, I don't know, man. He shows up on the injury report as questionable. Pretty sure he's gonna play. I wouldn't really be worried about it.
But
Guys
the
play
fact
through
that
injuries
questionable means like there's a
No.
really good chance he's not going to play.
That's not questionable is a designation based on how much they do in practice. So he was like limited. He didn't throw at all in practice. Means that he
that's but even so, that's still a big. I don't know.
I don't think it was a load of
seemed
shit.
fishy.
I don't
Yeah,
think it's
I
a
think
load of shit. I don't at all. I think they had to give him the proper designation based on what he had to do. I don't think anything of that. In the playoffs, guys play hurt all the time. He just fucking took an
let's do it
aspirin
this
and
way
played.
then. They need to change what those designations mean because questionable, sounds like he may or may not play. That
Doesn't matter
seem
what it
like
sounds like. Everybody within the league knows what it means.
Okay, but then everybody who's not in the league doesn't know that.
Who cares? Why does that matter?
Well,
if
because
you're
people
the
are gambling
other
on it. That's
their then it's your job as a gambler to know what you're looking at.
Yeah,
they don't need to change shit, man. They don't at all. How many times we go through
I
this
don't
all the
think they
time?
have
There's
them,
like
period.
seven guys. 7 guys are listed as questionable, and 6 of them play every single week.
I think I personally would even have those things. They're kind of silly. I mean, I don't care about gamblers enough to give them aids and like this is what you should do with your money, yes or no. I agree with you about the do your homework, but that's to me that is completely based upon how much you practice and whether or not you're playing, the likelihood you're playing or not doesn't seem like they jive at all. And it just seems stupid.
I don't know. I don't have any issue with it whatsoever. I think it's a necessary. I think it's a necessary thing. It's not like he was listed as doubtful.
Fine, move on.
And then the AFC game in the week in the Saturday was what the hell was it? Who's playing the Patriots? Oh, it was Bills and
Are we getting this old?
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty much. My mind's moved on to tonight with Miami and Indiana. It was
We'll talk
Bills
about
and
that in a minute.
Broncos. Bills and
Yeah.
Broncos, and that is one of the crazier things. I don't want to get into the calls, but I don't really understand what a catch and what isn't a catch anymore. I don't know that I think the Bills got hosed, but I do think it again comes down to very questionable moments in the playoffs. The Bills don't make it. That's fine. The really crazy thing is that, and that game goes to overtime. Bo Nix has broken his ankle. So in the second to last play, he kind of ran a little thing and sort of kind of got tackled in what looked like a routine play. Next play was a kneel down or a spike or something,
Right.
or a field goal kick to win the game. And then Sean Payton comes out in the press conference and is like, well, Bo Nix's season
Bad
is
news.
over. He needs surgery.
And
Jarrett Stidham has to play.
you think it's an emotion changer, the Caleb Williams pick? Can you imagine if you're a Bronco fan and you're like, we gonna have home field also? What?
Yeah.
Did I read that right? Is I guess has Twitter been hacked? That's kind of what it felt like. A Twitter hack
I
moment.
legitimately I saw the video first before I saw
Oh,
the news of him coming out there, because they were pretty much back to back, but I saw the video of him talking about it, and I was looking for like things for it to be AI, for it to be like a joke video, because it
yeah,
was like there's no fucking way, they're just not possible. Like,
right.
that's insane. What's also insane, in my opinion, is Sean McDermott getting fired from this game.
Agreed.
I understand that they have never gotten over the hump, whatever. Where I fail to comprehend is why that is simply the head coach's fault. I've never been big on Sean McDermott as a head coach. He has exceeded my expectations. He's been very, very, very good. I think he's working with an average GM. I think he's working with a slightly better version of Joe Shane. I have not agreed with their drafts for a long time. It was one of my concerns with Joe Shane coming in. Maybe if they didn't spend a second or third round pick on a fucking running back every single year, he'd have a better roster to work with or something. I don't know what the deal is, but I think that Sean McDermott is maybe just an above average coach that doesn't win the big game all on his own, but he's working with an average GM that doesn't supply him with the greatest of rosters to work with. I think that they got very lucky with Josh Allen being the correct guy. I mean,
You
also,
know,
Sean McDermott
it,
doesn't really hire the most inspiring coordinators either. I'll say that too.
and also after all that, he's won a division. Besides this year, he'd won it 5 years in a row.
I think he's
I
in
mean,
9 years, or 9 years he's been there. I think he's won it like 7 or 8 times.
yeah. I mean,
That's damn near fucking perfect, dude.
and I don't care how bad the rest of the division is. If you're that consistent for that long, you know,
You're doing something right.
you're doing something right. And I always say this, that postseasons are relative crapshoots. I mean, it's not what you should be measured on is how do I get to the playoffs every year? What have I done over a 17
Well, and the other
game
aspects
season
of
and
being a
stuff?
coach, like, is he a leader? Like whenever you bring up stuff, whenever I brought up, like, it's crazy the success, and everyone's just like, well, if you want to bring up like 17 different in-game decisions that were like poor decisions, then okay, those are the reasons you fire him for, because that's a
Mhm.
trait a head coach has to be able to manage the game. If he's not able to manage the game, if you just have a good roster getting you very far, then you have a head coach problem. That's fine. But don't tell me
Right.
he drops the big game. That's something else. Like, they keep losing to Mahomes in the playoffs. Like, geez, so does everybody else.
Yeah, he's been the best player of his generation. Uh, you know, you can't bitch and moan for 10 minutes about a bad call and then say, "Well, fire the coach." Well, he lost the game
Which
because of a
is it?
bad
Yeah.
call in your mind. Can't have it both ways.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I'm not here to defend Sean McDermott because I think he's a great coach. I never really did, but I do think it's wild to just move on from him because, quote, he can't win the big game. That to me seems crazy. But
Let me
we'll
ask you a
see.
question, Grump. Harbaugh doesn't commit to the Giants right away, and this Buffalo job opens up. You think he'd go to Buffalo and save the Giants?
Yes, because I think Brandon Beane is a better GM. I think they're getting a new stadium. I think Josh Allen's a better quarterback, and he's a more proven quarterback. I without a doubt in my
One
mind.
1,000%. So another kudos
And
to
you
the
get to be the
Giants.
guy who comes in there and delivers Buffalo a Super Bowl. Not, I mean, Jesus Christ, you might as well get the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, let's not equate the Giants situation with being Buffalo or Minnesota or Cleveland or the Knicks or anybody who hasn't won in 1,000 billion years. Giants have still won 4 Super Bowls. If Harbaugh wins a Super Bowl with this team in the next 5 years, fantastic, but he's not going to be thought of as a Mount Rushmore guy in Giants history. He wins one in Buffalo. My
Yes.
God, they may rename Western Buffalo Harbaugh.
Yeah. Harbaugh County.
Harbaugh County, for sure.
Um, yeah, and that's the play. So on the AFC side, I mean, I think at this point, with Denver not having Bo Nix, it's a foregone conclusion that it's the New England Patriots going to the Super Bowl, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it had to be such a barring an injury to Drake May or something. I can't see how they can lose this.
Yeah. So my prediction here is that it's a rematch of that another New England Seattle Super Bowl.
Mm. And I think Seattle would roll.
I don't know. I think it'll at least be a good game. I think that would be a
Oh,
great
I agree.
matchup. Yeah, I think that would
I
be a
agree.
better matchup than the Rams, personally. But either
Yeah.
way, you're getting a Super Bowl matchup if rematch if it's
Hmm.
Patriots. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Anything else? That it for us?
Real,
Is it the end of the
real
episode?
quick, tonight we have
Oh,
the.
Miami and Indiana. Yeah, I know who you don't want to win, but
Oh my
who do you
God.
think is going to win?
By the time you're listening to this, you'll know the outcome, and I'm probably wrong, but I just have a feeling, all biases aside, I think Indiana's going to roll. I just have never been a Carson Beck guy, just because you know, he game manages his way into, then people are starting to really blow him now, and he's not that good. Miami's got a good defense, and the defense is playing really good, during this playoff run, but any team that was losing to Florida at the end of the third quarter of any game should not be considered a national title. They should almost be disqualified for it this year. I just think it's Indiana's year. I think that if this gets into a shootout, Miami can't trade score for score, but I think that's going to happen. I think Indiana rolls by at least 15.
I think Indiana's going to win by 10. I do love the talking out of both sides of your mouth. For
About
they should almost be disqualified for a national championship despite finishing 10th because they were losing to Florida in the third quarter.
no, and Miami was losing to
That's what
Florida
I'm
again.
saying. Yeah, Miami.
Right, so they should, yeah.
But if
So
they
why would
win, because they finished 10th, they're absolutely qualified for the playoffs.
I'm being facetious. Like, how
I,
can
I,
how
I
can you
get
how can we
it
take a team seriously that was losing to Florida at the end of a third quarter of a game?
because there's still another quarter. That's why.
Oh,
There's
jeez.
15 more minutes. If you had said there was a minute left in the fourth quarter and they were losing by double digits, then that's a better argument than they were
I
losing
think
with
I think every
25
single
more
person
minutes
here
of
knows what
game
I'm
time.
talking about with that, where
Uh,
they're in a dogfight with a bad team.
sure, no, I get it, but
Yeah.
they are playing. I didn't expect Miami to get this far. I'll say it that way. I
No.
truly did not expect Miami to get this far.
And
But
also, but one thing I will say though is, just because they did get this far, that doesn't validate that validates they should be in instead of Notre Dame, because we have no evidence to say Notre Dame would have done the same thing either. I hate people
no, but the
make that
evidence is
argument.
that Notre Dame lost to Miami.
Right, I know.
I agree with you.
I did say that Miami deserved to be in over, but this run doesn't validate that it
No,
was the right decision. It was just, well, they took because both teams, I think, and this is what I'll talk out of the side of my mouth. Both teams were worthy of being that 12 spot and being in.
I don't think that. I don't think that's talking out of both sides of your mouth because your
No, I'm making
position.
fun of the Gator thing before. I'm
No,
saying,
I know,
yeah.
but yeah, like you said, like I think that you should open up the competition to include this many teams. The only
Mhm.
thing is, I'm not going to give a shit which team you pick from 10, 11, 12. I'm not going to sit there
Right.
and quibble over strength of schedule. I think the correct decision was made going with the head to head. Like, if you can't beat them, then you don't belong
Right,
in
right.
there.
I,
That's
I
fine. But like these people were like, they played this one, and like, I don't care anymore. You're arguing over 12 or
right.
13. Go fuck yourself. I don't care. 12 or 13. Go ahead. Fine. Have your
The
way.
problem, the final thing about this, let's say, is the playoff. It's not that how many teams are in 12 or 16. It's which 12 or which 16 teams are getting in, because
Hmm.
no Miami or Notre Dame is more worthy of being in than the winner of the American Conference.
Right.
That's just and it's going to play out. The more and more evidence we get every year when you get these first round matchups and these teams like the Boise States get in or whatever, and they just get their asses reamed because, oh, well, they are seeded because they're the fourth highest conference thing, even though the team is not nearly as good as these other ones that aren't getting in. So
We'll
that's your
see.
problem.
I think we'll see though. NIL might be able to even the playing field. Where you get schools with a lot of money behind it that don't typically spend that way. Now that they can openly spend, perhaps Arkansas suddenly is able to. I know they're in the SEC, so whatever. But
Right.
just as an example, or even Georgia Tech has some money behind it, right?
They're
Where
in a major conference. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, like we'll see. These programs we don't typically see. Maybe they deserve to be in there because they have the money backing to get the guys in there now. We'll see. We'll see.
A team like UCF is a good example of that, where they're in the Big 12. It's not considered a major conference anymore. They just get this big, theoretically they could get a lot of money from Florida, from people down there and stuff, and we'll see. But then again, you know, it's more often not going to be these teams are getting in because of, well, they deserve a chance over there. They're truly not one of the 12 best.
I would agree with that.
Yep.
In any case, we will see you guys next week with results from the conference champ. Oh, will we have an episode next week? That's a good question. So
Ooh.
I will be in the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl with Bobby for Giants Nation show all next week from Sunday to Friday. I assume that we're going to have an episode, and I assume that it's going to be the same time, Tuesday morning with you guys. So
maybe we'll get Bobby on.
yeah, I'm sure Bobby
Yeah.
will want to join too. The only question is that this year the Senior Bowl has a different director and they've changed the schedule of things, so practices aren't as early in the morning, and I have no idea whatsoever how that's going to fuck everything up. So it's not what we're used to. We're not used to.
We'll figure it out. We'll get
But
it done.
I assume that there will be an episode next week at some time, so stay subscribed, iTunes,
Please.
SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, there's an account on Twitter as well. So there are ways to find out if an episode happened by subscribing.
Hey, and now we're getting into the 21st century. We're actually putting clips of this now on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook Reels. So if you want a little condensed version, if we can only stand a minute of us at a shot, subscribe that way too.
Yep, that's another easy way to find out that another episode was released is that, oh shit, there's some new clips up there. So that works as well. So we will see you guys next week. Until then, go Giants.
Go Giants.